taking into account the circumstances and the compulsions of a coalition polity, I have done as best as I could do under the circumstances.
India has lost one of its greatest leaders who transformed the nation with his vision and determination. Ladies and gentlemen, India is mourning the loss of former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, an illustrious statesman and a great economist who passed away at the age of 92 last evening. Manmohan Singh had held different jobs, from economic job in the country before becoming the Prime Minister in 2004. He is credited with the opening up of Indian economy in 1991 and as Finance Minister announced a budget that changed the country. Dr. Singh secured the landmark nuclear deal with America despite heavy protests from the opposition during his first term as Prime Minister. If I go on with the kind of work which he has done during his tenure, being Finance Minister, being Prime Minister, I think the show will not be enough. But to discuss his legacy, we are joined by esteemed guests. I have with me Ashima Goel. Ashima, welcome to the show. While we are talking of the achievements, which are many by Dr. Manmohan Singh, if I want to ask you in the current context, what is the learning which we can draw parallelly with the work he has done?
I think as a person, his humility and simplicity, his ability to take a very balanced view, even of opposition, civility all the time, I think that is a major lesson for our current political debate. And, the courage of doing very difficult things when it's always difficult to make major changes. And, a very good intellectual support for the choices made. Just as an example, some of the decisions, the gradual opening out, the sequenced capital account convertibility, the kind of exchange rate regime adopted, market determined, but intervention to prevent volatility continues even today. And they have stood India in very good stead as we faced many external shocks. But we must remember that he was, as he just said, as his recording was saying, he was in a coalition government where there were many pulls and pressures. So unfortunately, most of the reforms related to the external sector, the financial sector, to enhancing citizen rights and transfers, but many key kind of reforms necessary to improve the domestic supply side, we were not able to do. And that led to a period of second term as PM, period of high inflation, slow growth. And that time also because of the global financial crisis, India had joined the big fiscal stimulus. So those lessons also we must remember today, that fiscal spending has to be counter-cyclical. You have to reduce deficits in good times, so you have the space to spend in when times turn adverse. And that before directing spending at any sector, you must make sure that the supply side bottlenecks are not major. That time, a lot of money was pumped into farm loan waivers, the agriculture sector, but the supply side issues were not sorted out. So we had double-digit food price inflation. Now today, again, we have double-digit vegetable price spikes. And there's a lot of money being transferred to poorer women, and they will spend this in a more diversified food basket. And that is going to increase inflationary pressures unless we sort out vegetable supply chains. Yeah? Right. So I think we should take all these lessons from his term.
Right. We are also joined by Ratin Roy. Welcome to ET Now. My first question will be on the fiscal prudence. Now, Dr. Manmohan Singh was known for that, spending versus the fiscal prudence. How do you see he has maintained the balance? And again, what is the learning which we can take now?
Well, on fiscal prudence, I don't think Manmohan Singh was especially prudent or imprudent because it's a complicated matter. It depends, especially in a coalition government, to a large extent on your other pressures. When we were undergoing economic liberalization, the gamble he took was that it would pay off in terms of growth and improvement of the tax base, which it did. Which is why he was able to, sort of bring in some fairly modernizing tax reforms. But then he had autonomy and control as a finance minister. His biggest achievement, I think, with fiscal prudence was to complete and finish what the Vajpayee government had started in terms of the fiscal responsibility and management bill, to maintain policy continuity with that, so that at least in the case of the states, we saw a quantum improvement in the in fiscal prudence and fiscal quality. What he was not able to do with respect to fiscal prudence is to come up with a framework which would discipline the government of India in times when the government of India, would tend to spend perhaps more than it ought to. And also what he was not able to do, it was not in his hands. It's a disease that India has, which you can see in the ongoing ridiculous GST debate, to convert things like budget speeches into trivia. In 2007 or 2008, Chidambaram gave a long speech just before he became Home Minister, where he started talking about taxes on sanitary napkins. The same thing was happening, and lipstick. The same thing is happening now in the GST Council. He used to complain about the fact that people, not just politicians, but also civil servants, did not take economic policy making seriously enough. And as somebody who delivered results, starting from his tenure as chief economic advisor, where in 1974 he brought down inflation from very high levels to manageable levels, helped us get out of our worst existential crisis, economic crisis in 1991, managed to successfully deal with the global economic crisis that's fallout of India. It was understandably he used to get impatient with the constant trivialization of economic policy that happened. So in terms of fiscal prudence, I think he was very conscious that was necessary, but he was also very conscious of the political limitations. So he did what he always did best, which is try to create a consensus, build good teams, bring in the best brains into thinking about the problem, to try and convince stakeholders that the correct path would be a path where you maintain prudence as default and release resources only when you have to. He was not completely successful in that, but that is because the politics of the time was not amenable to that sort of king-like prime minister operating.
Right. Ashima, I want to come to you for one of the topics which is often discussed is devaluation of the rupee, which happened during the tenure of Dr. Manmohan Singh. Now, in the current scenario, we have seen how rupee is behaving. I want to draw parallels, although the time was different, the situation demanded something else, but how that learning can be impactful and something which can help in current scenario.
Yeah, like I was saying, we started the reforms with very large double depreciation, a transitional period. But after that, there was sort of steady one-way depreciation to cover for India's larger inflation differential. Our inflation was higher than that of our trading partners. And but slowly, and this is the other aspect of the reforms, that of gradualism, which was very, very useful. That as financial markets developed, as FX markets developed, I remember it was in 2003 or 4 that for the first time the rupee actually appreciated. Two-way movement started. And the markets, there were so many questions. People were really concerned because they were used to the rupee moving in a certain direction and a different direction. So, but the other lesson we learned from this time is that however much you depreciate, before the reform, the rupee was 8 rupees to $1. And today it's in the 80s. But we still say our exports are not competitive because too much depreciation, we are highly dependent on imports, leads to domestic inflation and real appreciation. So you require more depreciation. So the real, and as I was saying, a flexible market-determined regime, because exchange rate has many functions. It affects exporters and importers, so it has to be balanced between the interests of both. It affects investors who are coming in, fixed income investors. They don't want the rupee to depreciate too much. And it affects consumers who, although for us it's largely oil imports and not so much consumer goods imports in India. So you need, and we have to be aware. We've done some research which suggests that there are, when you take account of structural factors, different factors pull in different directions, such as productivity increase and financial development. So the real effective exchange rate index is a good indicator of competitive exchange rate. And we've seen through these 3 decades that when the rupee is near that, our exports do relatively better over a 2-year term. And exporters don't like too much rupee volatility. So I think these lessons have served us well. There should be some two-way movement to induce exporters, importers to hedge, but we should be near the equilibrium real rate, which can sustain our exports since we have a current account deficit. There should not be, the regulator must not be determining the exchange rate, markets must develop. And we have seen that happen in this current period, that there's been a lot of complaint of very heavy-handed RBI, too much intervention, too little volatility. Banks like volatility since they make money from that. But if you see, the foreign exchange market has also deepened in this period. The turnover has doubled pre to post-pandemic. And the rupee has stayed near its effective equilibrium exchange rate. So although the kinds of intervention have varied over these decades, the lessons and the initial kind of regime set in place in the early years of reforms has sustained. So it was a very good and careful and well thought through decision on what India needed. And it's done well for us. I mean, our currency has been relatively stable compared to our peers. And we have not really suffered from external sector shocks. We've been able to absorb them.
There are many lessons which we can learn in the current scenario, but I would request both the guests don't go away because it's a time to take a quick break. When we come back after the break, we will ask our guest which are the topmost reforms according to them. Don't go away. Welcome back after the break. We are continuing the discussion on Dr. Manmohan Singh's legacy and joined by 2 esteemed guests, Dr. Ratin Roy and Ashima Goel. I want to come to you, Mr. Roy, first. What is the topmost reform according to you which Dr. Manmohan Singh has left and why?
Well, the topmost reform that he led in the narrow sense was obviously the liberalization of both industrial policy and trade policy in 1991. That's the reform that he led. But you must remember, there were many reforms he seeded, SEEDET. Chief among them, and often forgotten in my view, is when he was governor of the Reserve Bank, he appointed a committee led by Professor Shubhomay Chakrabarty to inquire into the workings of the Indian financial system and to suggest reforms. From that came out an implicit roadmap which has left the entire Indian financial system much stronger than it was then. Undoubtedly, that is something that not just did Dr. Singh seed, but he also shepherded through into maturity, and he deserves full credit for that. The other is, of course, understanding that India would need to spread its bets, and therefore going into a reset with profound potential economic implications with the US and with Japan. Not just a nuclear deal, which you're highlighting, but also the building of broader investment relationships, the building of a strategic partnership, and complementing that with Japan. In fact, if you look at the Quad today, I would say that would be something, again, that Dr. Singh seeded. And the Quad, as it stands today, is actually much more about technology and technical exchange than about defense. So I would say that Dr. Singh, both on the foreign policy front, drawing on his experience in the UN, and on the economic front, these would be the 4 major reforms he did in different roles that he occupied. First as Governor of the Reserve Bank, then as Finance Minister of India, and then as Prime Minister.
Right. I want to come to you, Ashima. since you have been an MPC member, from your analysis of Dr. Manmohan Singh, as a RBI governor, what has been the most notable thing which he has done?
I think with his work, he early realized that the kind of financial repressions we had were really counterproductive. And so initiating the steps towards financial market liberalization, he seeded these reforms, as Ratan was saying, setting up major committees that laid the roadmap for financial deregulation, financial sector. Also, not just moving from a controller of capital accounts towards setting up a modern exchange like NSE and a regulator like SEBI. So the idea that you need, it's from, I call it deregulation to re-regulation, a different kind of regulation. Yeah, that you can't have a free or unfettered market, but you need a different kind of regulation, so modern regulation, technology-based. He instituted that. And the second thing was the very careful sequencing of the financial and capital account liberalization reforms. Current account liberalization, okay, you had reduced tariffs, but capital account also is a good choice of first liberalizing FDI and then equity flows, while short-term debt flows were last in the hierarchy. And this is a path we are still following. So instead of like certain Latin American countries went in, and there was a lot of international pressure that time, IMF, etc., that liberalize the capital account that's essential for foreign capital to come in and benefit the economy. But considering the kind of crisis the globe has seen, it's been countries that did that have found it to be very disruptive. Yeah.
Right. Dr. Roy, if I want to ask you from the kind of structural reforms which Dr. Singh has undertaken, what kind of continuity or benefit India can take now?
Well, the major structural reforms that Dr. Singh did would not have been possible if he did not do something that only a very secure person, which he was, with great confidence in his analytical capabilities, which he had, could do. Which is going, if you look at his track record in government and start with people like Sukumar Chakrabarti, senior to him, Arjun Sengupta, Bagicha Minhas, come down to his contemporaries, C. Rangarajan, Bimal Jalan, and then people junior to him, Vijay Kelkar, Raghuram Rajan, Kaushik Basu. He managed to get them all, Monte Carlo Wadia, he managed to get them all to work as a collective, as a team, to deliver results. He was not a target-based finance minister or prime minister. He was a results-based finance minister, prime minister, who therefore realized results come not through the emperor giving orders and minions going to follow them, but through painstaking teamwork, a nuanced understanding of issues, and getting people to give their best to you as a policy leader and to use that to come up with harmonious solutions. So I would say his biggest contribution was a way of working which was remarkably collectivist in approach, professional in outlook, respectful of technical competency and bringing the best of technical competency cross-generationally from everyone, but at the same time, being able to sell it politically to people who ordinarily would not have either the time or the inclination to go into these things. So I think from our economic reforms in 91 to all the things that quite rightly Ashima was pointing to, capital account, the calibration of our capital account policy, the calibration of our exchange rate policy, his early concerns with getting a proper GST going. I remember these long conversations he had with Dr. Kelkar on this, which then resonated in the 13th Finance Commission when I was the chief economist. He actually believed in teamwork and not in top-down order giving. In that sense, he was not communistic at all, not Brezhnevian at all. He was a collectivist. That is a legacy we would do well to reinculcate in our country. And I think I have not seen that for the last 10 years, I'm afraid.
Right. Ashima, if I want to ask you in one word, if you summarize the legacy of Dr. Manmohan Singh, what will be and why?
Well, it would be that he took the step of liberalization because those ideas were there. People were seeing the fallout, the negative fallouts of the current system, but nobody had the courage to actually bring about the real changes. So I remember in the budget where he presented this, he said, Sarfaroshi ki tamanna, ab hamare, whatever. So he's willing to, he's offering his head because in India we have so much pushback, so much criticism of those who are in power, and we are such a diverse country. So the ability to, the courage to undertake something new, something different, something difficult, to do it in a very carefully thought out manner, keeping in account the country's structure and its needs, not just copying Western reforms. I think in India, we really suffered because we adopted this big push industrialization because that was the fashion abroad at the time of our independence. Now, at the time of liberalization, many of these East Asian countries were going in for full capital account liberalization. It was all very pro-market, but India adopted a nuanced, gradual approach. So that, thinking through adapted to Indian structure was very, very important. But I would say, on one negative issue, partly because he was in a coalition government and this is the government priorities, that the easier reforms were done, which is opening out externally and liberalizing the financial sector or passing legislations. But the big issue of working well with state governments because and empowering the third tier, despite passing those 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments, they were never implemented. So agriculture, China did so well after its enhanced sustained high growth because with a population of about 1 billion, you must have high agricultural productivity. Otherwise, inflation is going to stop your growth. And we've seen that repeatedly in India. Growth has been volatile post-reform because it's been interrupted by periods of high inflation. You're dependent on commodity imports as well as food. And so that those difficult, because education, health, public services, agriculture, these are all state subjects. You have to work with the states and improving services in cities. So these kind of reforms were underdone. And again, the pressure from abroad is to do things like labor market reforms, land market reforms, which is what FDI wants. But that is not, which would benefit foreign capital coming in. But that is not the key. We should learn from him that you see what is important for the country at that point. What is the nuanced type of reforms the country needs, which includes improving farm productivity and removing others, improving infrastructure, unfortunately, they left infrastructure to the market. That was one reform. They thought they shut the development banks and they thought markets are going to finance infrastructure. It never happened. And then they pushed commercial banks to lend to banks, which
Definitely,
which there are
definitely. If we look at the legacy, the show is not enough. The words are not enough. Thank you so much, both the guests, for joining at this hour. If we talk about Dr. Manmohan Singh, he has laid the foundation for modern India, India where the founding stone has been done by the leaders which were there, and now we can rise with India. Thank you for watching.